The room had already started leaning toward me before he walked in, but I could feel it in the way the investors stopped checking their phones, in the way one of them uncapped his pen when I brought up the final slide, in the way the screen behind me held 3 years of work I had built piece by piece, late nights, missed weekends, and the kind of obsession companies love to profit from, as long as they never have to name the person carrying it. That was the moment Tristan Hale chose to enter. The door opened. Expensive shoes, calm face, perfect timing. He didn't apologize for interrupting. He didn't even perform courtesy. He stepped in like the room had been waiting for him, glanced once at the screen behind me, then nodded to the tech assistant by the wall. My projector went black. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Tristan looked at me and said, almost gently, "We're going with my idea instead. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 45 years old." And in that moment, I learned how quickly a man with the right last name will try to rename a woman's life's work. He moved to the front of the room. His deck came up on the screen, and there it was, my structure, my sequence, my strategy dressed in newer language and sold back as something bolder, faster, more market ready. He spoke like a visionary. I stood there listening to him present something he had not built and did not understand deeply enough to fear. Warren Hale sat at the end of the table and said nothing. That was the part that cut deepest. Not Tristan's arrogance, but not even the theft. It was the silence that made it policy. A few people shifted. One looked embarrassed, another looked relieved, the way weak people do when power saves them the trouble of having principles. Then one investor nodded, another smiled, and before I could decide whether to laugh or walk out, applause broke across the table. For him, I closed my laptop. The sound was small, clean, final. Tristan glanced at me, but expecting anger. Maybe tears, maybe a plea. I gave him none of that. I smiled and said, "Enjoy the funding." Then I walked out, already knowing this was no longer just a stolen room. It was the opening move in a collapse they were arrogant enough to mistake for a coronation. Her fear presents this as a work of fiction, an original story shaped from the kinds of power, silence, assumes, and betrayal people know are real, even when the names are not. I went back the next morning because humiliation was one thing. I needed to see how far they meant to carry it. The lobby looked exactly the same: glass, polished stone, the same faint citrus scent from the diffuser Warren's assistant liked too much. Buildings are very good at pretending nothing happened. My inbox was not. Overnight, the language had shifted. Not the project itself, just the ownership of it. The program I had led for years was now being described as a strategic initiative under Tristan's growth division. My name still appeared, but lower now, thinner somehow. Not as the architect, as technical support. Support. I was still in the building, still on the chain, still close enough to be blamed, just no longer close enough to be named. A memo from Paige Mercer hit before I reached my desk. Clean corporate language, smooth, polite. Every investor-facing communication was to align with the new narrative going forward. No confusion, no mixed messaging, no unauthorized descriptions of leadership structure. My name stayed in the chain, but only where blame might still need a place to land. That was how they did it. Not with one loud theft in a conference room, but with quiet edits the next morning. Sonia found me near the validation bay. "If they start bending ownership," she said, keeping her voice low, "the approval chain gets messy." Messy, I repeated. Her eyes flicked toward the hall. I didn't say broken. Julian from legal stopped me before noon. "Things are being restructured," he said. "Don't make this harder by reacting emotionally. They steal your work, then ask you to be professional about the paperwork." By the time Warren called the smaller meeting, I understood the real danger. Yesterday had been theater. Today was history revision. He slid the transfer papers toward me. Tristan sat beside him, easy in his chair, like fraud became leadership if you printed it on company letterhead. I looked at the page and said, "I won't sign anything that calls this his." If they had only stolen the room, They might still have found a way back. But once they tried to steal ownership on paper, they had finally stepped into the part of the collapse that leaves a record. Warren called me in just before lunch, which told me two things immediately. First, they were worried. Second, they still thought this could be managed with tone. The room was smaller than the investor suite. No glass wall, no polished performance, just Warren at the head of the table. Tristan leaned back like he was already bored, Paige with a legal pad in front of her, and Julian, wearing that careful face he used when pretending a fire was only a temperature issue. Warren folded his hands. Let's be practical. Men usually say that right before asking a woman to swallow something rotten and call it strategy. He told me the company was entering a different phase now. Growth, visibility, market confidence. The project needed a different public face. Someone better suited to lead it through expansion. Tristan picked up the thread without looking at me. It needs commercial vision, not just technical discipline. Not just, that was his whole disease right there. I kept my voice even. If it's your idea, explain why the release path only holds if the validation and approval layers stay exactly where they are. He smiled, but it slipped at the edges. We need speed, clearer positioning, a stronger market narrative. A narrative, I said, is not the same thing as execution. Paige jumped in. Investors responded to Tristan's framing. They responded to a room. I said, that doesn't mean the structure underneath it survives being touched. Warren leaned forward like he was offering peace. You can still be part of this. Stay on the technical side. Let Tristan lead externally. There it was. Do the work. Let the right last name wear it. I looked at Tristan then. Really looked at him. He sat there with the lazy confidence of a man who thought holding the microphone meant he now owned the song. No, I said. The room went still. That project was mine before he even knew what to call it. Tristan gave a small laugh, like I was being emotional instead of exact. Warren's jaw tightened. Julian said nothing. That was when I saw their real mistake. They thought I was fighting for dignity. I wasn't. I was watching them build their rescue plan around a lie and waiting to see which one of them would say it too clearly to take back. By the end of that afternoon, they had done what people like Warren always do when reality starts slipping. They wrote a cleaner version of it. Paige's investor memo went out just before 5. Crisp subject line, smooth language, no visible panic. According to the official version, Helixian remained in full control of the project. Execution was stable, and leadership alignment had already been secured under an updated structure designed for growth. It was clever in the way dangerous things often are. The memo never actually said Tristan had built the project. It didn't need to. It arranged the words so neatly that anyone reading them would arrive there on their own. New phase, new leadership, streamlined execution, continued confidence. I read it twice, then saved the memo and the full email chain into a private folder. Once people start polishing fiction into record, you stop trusting memory and start trusting timestamps. Mira Donnelly did not send outrage back. That would have been easier. Instead, she replied with questions. Who now held release ownership? What protections still governed continuity had the approval chain changed? If leadership had shifted, who now carried execution accountability under the structure previously presented? That was when Julian finally looked afraid. He stopped at my office door without stepping in. The memo may have gone broader than ideal, broader. Legal language for we may have stepped somewhere we shouldn't have. Down the hall, Sonia had been asked to prepare validation materials proving everything remained sound under the revised structure. She didn't refuse, she just didn't move fast. Near 6, Evan stopped by pretending he needed a charger. They're telling the team to align language. He said quietly. Approvals too. Everything has to reflect Tristan's leadership now. There it was. Not just stolen credit, forced reality. Warren still believed that if they survived the week, funding would close and the story would harden around them. But as I looked at Paige's memo glowing on my screen, I knew they hadn't sent a life raft. They had created a record, and once a lie reaches the record, doesn't it stop being politics and start becoming exposure? They scheduled the follow-up fast, which told me Paige's memo had not done what Warren hoped. If it had calmed the investors, there would have been no need for another room, another call, another performance. Once people with real money start asking careful questions, executives get nervous in very polished ways. I wasn't invited. That was intentional. If Tristan was going to prove the project belonged to him now, he needed a room without the woman who built it sitting inside it like a fact no one could talk around. By noon, I had enough pieces. Tristan led the session himself. Calm voice, expensive confidence. And at first, it almost worked. He spoke about scale, timing, partnerships, market position. The room softened. That was the dangerous part. Then Mira started asking the wrong questions for a man like Tristan. Not broad ones, structural ones. How did the release path still hold under the new setup? Which approvals remained fixed? Who now carried sign-off responsibility? If leadership had shifted, where did continuity actually live? That was where his voice changed. Oh, not much, just enough. He answered one question, then widened the next, turned specifics into language, shifted part of it towards Sonia, then toward the technical team. Sonia did not rescue him. She confirmed only what the current record allowed. Then Mira asked it clean. If leadership has transferred, who now holds accountability for the continuity path previously presented? No one answered that well. Not Warren, not Paige, not Julian, not Tristan. He smiled anyway and said everything was being aligned internally. But absence has weight when the wrong person is missing. I was not in that room. And somehow that became the heaviest fact in it. He had stolen the first room with confidence. But in the second, even my absence was stronger than his pitch. Mira did not ask for another presentation. She asked for records. That was when the tone changed for everyone, even the people still pretending this was a messaging problem instead of a structural one. Presentations can be massaged, memos can be softened. Records are colder than ambition. And they do not care who your father is. By late afternoon, Northbridge had requested a review of everything investor-facing from the previous 2 days. Meeting notes, follow-up materials, internal summaries, official communication. Anything that helped shape the story Helixian had tried to sell after Tristan hijacked my pitch. I wasn't in the review room, but I didn't need to be. Once the right pieces were placed side by side, the room would do the rest on its own. First Tristan in the pitch room, looking at me and saying, "We're going with my idea instead." Then Paige's memo, calmly assuring investors that continuity remained stable under the new structure. Leadership was aligned, and execution was moving forward with confidence. That was the crack. If it was Tristan's idea now, then what exactly was continuity still resting on? And if continuity still depended on the original approval chain, why had the person who built it been pushed out of the center and rewritten as support? Julian saw it first for what it was. Not aggressive positioning. Exposure. Paige tried to soften it. Investor language isn't meant to be read that rigidly, but rigidly was exactly how money gets read once trust starts slipping. Sonia, careful as ever, confirmed only one thing: the project could not honestly be described as having cleanly transferred leadership while the accountability chain beneath it remained unresolved. Mira didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Northbridge, she said, does not invest in structures where ownership, authority, and execution truth are moving in different directions. That was the moment the deal stopped wobbling and started breaking. By the time the review ended, the news had already moved through the building. Funding was no longer delayed. It was cracking from the inside. And wasn't it fitting that the same sentence Tristan used to steal the room had now become the sentence killing the deal? The language changed before the outcome did. That is usually how power starts slipping, not with a dramatic collapse, with people quietly stopping the use of a certain name. By the next morning, nobody serious on the investor side was calling it Tristan's initiative anymore. That phrase had vanished from calls, follow-up notes, and official questions. The tone had shifted. This was no longer about who had told the better story in one room. It was about who had actually built the thing Helixian was trying to sell. And once that question enters a deal, it does not leave politely. Northbridge wanted more ownership path, continuity, technical accountability, clear boundaries around what Helixian actually owned and what still depended on my structure. Warren kept calling it miscommunication, a misunderstanding, an overlap between internal transition and external language. But miscommunication is when two people describe the same truth badly. This was something else. Page was quietly removed from a few sensitive investor exchanges. In offices like ours, demotions often arrive dressed as calendar changes. Evan found me near the parking deck and handed me printed emails he had no business taking out of the building. Tristan had been pushing the technical team to align language around his leadership, not understanding, not authority. Language. Later. Sonia closed my office door and stood there a second too long. Like even entering my office now meant admitting where the real answers had been all along. I won't sign anything that distorts ownership, she said, or breaks accountability to make this cleaner. It was the closest thing to loyalty I had heard all week. That evening, Mira met me alone. No pressure. Just questions about what was legally mine and what could be separated cleanly. I answered exactly. And for the first time, I let myself think the thought I had been refusing. What if the real choice was no longer whether to save the company, but whether to stop being the invisible structure it kept expecting me to be? Warren started calling everyone by 8 the next morning. Old investors, bridge lenders, strategic partners who had smiled through dinners and promised to stay close. Men who once took his calls on the first ring now needed follow-ups from assistants. That was the first sign the wound had moved past embarrassment and into appetite. Money can forgive arrogance, Cha. It does not forgive instability. Tristan still joined the meetings. That almost impressed me. He came in wearing the same measured calm he had used in the investor room, shoulders back, expression controlled, as if one more round of explanation might still pull the whole thing back under the family name. He still had not learned the difference between being heard and being believed. But every call returned the same message in different clothes. No one wanted to put money into a structure where ownership, authority, and execution truth no longer matched. By afternoon, the pressure had widened. Vendors tightened terms. One partner asked for additional guarantees. Another paused a pending agreement. Problems that had once belonged to future planning were now sitting in the hallway like unpaid bills. Then Julian finally said the phrase nobody in that building wanted to hear. Cash crisis. Warren asked me to meet him privately that evening. His assistant called it a mature solution, as if maturity meant stepping back under a structure they had shoved onto my shoulders and then denied was mine. I declined. I had spent too many years saving messes no one intended to credit me for. I was not going to become their invisible correction again. And somewhere across town, in one last meeting meant to save Helixian, Tristan finally learned what applause had hidden from him. People were still willing to enter the room, listen to the pitch, and study the numbers. But when he finished, no one moved to save him. The funding collapsed on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. No shouting. No slammed phones. Just a short sequence of confirmations, each one colder than the last, until there was nothing left to pretend around. Northbridge was out. The bridge money Warren had chased did not arrive. The firms he thought might step in looked at the same broken structure and decided not to stand under it. When trust goes, it rarely goes alone. The missing money turned everything else cruel very quickly. Vendors tightened, timelines froze. Agreements that had looked like future growth became present wait. Within days, Helixian stopped looking wounded and started looking hollow. It did not fall because I walked away. It fell because Warren and Tristan tried to steal the one thing keeping the deal alive while convincing themselves they could still sell it without understanding what held it together. Inside the company, people broke apart by function. Paige lost her role. Julian kept his title. But whatever protection he thought neutrality had bought him was gone. Sonia walked out with the cleanest hands in the building because she had refused to sign a prettier lie. Then Helixian filed for bankruptcy. That word moved through the city faster than any memo ever had. Tristan lost exactly what he had reached for: the spotlight, the borrowed authority, and the room that had once clapped for him before it learned what he really was. I did not feel triumphant, just clear. I had not pushed the building down. I had simply stopped holding it up. A few months after Helixian collapsed, I signed the last formation document for my new company in a conference room small enough to fit inside Warren's old office twice over. That felt right. Nothing about what came next had been rushed, stolen, or blurred. My lawyers went through every boundary line, every file, every date. Everything that was truly mine to carry forward had been separated cleanly, but with more care than Helixian had ever shown when it tried to take it from me. Mira and the others did not invest because they felt sorry for me. That mattered. They invested after documents, review, questions, and more than one conversation where I had to prove that what survived the wreckage was not bitterness. It was structure, judgment, direction. The parts that still worked after performance had burned itself to the ground. Our first office was small. Too small for vanity. Just enough space for clarity. Evan was there early, along with the first few people who had chosen this risk with me. Cables on the floor, takeaway coffee on the side table, a whiteboard crowded with plans that belonged to the future instead of someone's ego. For the first time in a long time, every person in the room stood inside work that matched the name on the door. I stood at the front with one hand on the projector remote and remembered Tristan stepping into that other room, killing my screen and thinking he had taken something permanent. But the future had never lived in that room. It had lived in the person they kept trying to turn into support. So I turned on my own projector. No one interrupted. No one renamed my work. No one asked me to stand behind someone who had never earned the front. Then the screen lit up. And for the first time in a very long time, nothing in the room belonged to a lie.